Far Cry 6 has been officially revealed, and if you have come to this channel for Far Cry related things, you know that the map editor and multiplayer are the primary functions for this channel when we cover it, but I might have some bad news for all of you. Stay tuned. Fellow revolutionaries, welcome back to the LZ, and so good to have you. I know it's been a while since I put something up, but pandemic and worth life has just had me sort of in the dumps. So it's good to be back, slinging some content for the fellow LZ. And something that everybody knew was coming, one of Ubisoft's flagship franchises, Far Cry, is getting a new entry, and obviously they have never failed to deliver on trying to sell a compelling campaign, and that's pretty much always been the main focus of Far Cry. Far Cry 6 takes place in a fictional place in Cuba with revolution as the backdrop. And honestly, I'm not one for celebrating CG trailers with no gameplay present, but I know that Far Cry 6 is coming in February, and we'll probably have that shortly. But to the big news that obviously this is speculation and this isn't confirmed, but if you were here in the LZ for Far Cry, we generally don't talk about the campaign much for those games. They're always good. They're generally the standard Ubisoft fare of open world shooters, etc. But you're probably here for map editor and multiplayer information. And so if we're going by historic precedent for Ubisoft, when it comes to the reveal and marketing cycle of Far Cry games, you're probably going to be disappointed so far in that if we go by the precedents that they have set, Far Cry 6 likely won't be getting a multiplayer and or map editor feature. So Legacy Zero, how do you know? You're probably asking, and so let's cover those precedents. Before Far Cry Primal, generally their habit was to show the main game with the story, and then most often the marketing plans would generally come to actually revealing the multiplayer and map editor further down the marketing cycle. Throughout those times, generally Ubisoft would tease the community with things like soon, or we'll talk about those features later, or we have yet to confirm those things. As a matter of fact, during Far Cry 4, it got so badly that they would continue to just say things like soon, and then they only revealed the map editor and multiplayer components right at launch. So this was about 6 to 8 months worth of hyping, or sort of punting the hype, I like to say, where they just say sort of, we'll do this at some point, just be ready. And then when they eventually revealed it, the map editor was there, but it actually came without a multiplayer component. Far Cry 4 actually had a separate multiplayer component that did not use the map editor at all, and fans of the game were not happy, yours truly included. But I gotta say, after Far Cry 4, Ubisoft actually took the feedback to heart, because following Far Cry 4 came Far Cry Primal, a single-player only campaign-driven, sort of unnumbered title of the flagship franchise. And thankfully, right out the gate, they explained that Far Cry Primal was only going to be a single-player outing, which I appreciate their candor and honesty. When Far Cry 5 was announced, right out of the gate, marketing decided to reveal that there would be a multiplayer and PvP component that would eventually become the Far Cry 5 Arcade, which in my opinion was the best editor and multiplayer outing to date. Obviously it had its issues, it dropped support maybe a little bit too early. Probably the biggest crime that I say that this editor had was that it never got new modes patched in, which I'm very sorry to say really kind of hurts the multiplayer experience, because it doesn't allow editors and creators in the editor to really flex their sort of map layout creative muscle when it came to things like objective modes and things like that. Sadly, these were missing from the multiplayer and editor, but same difference when Far Cry New Dawn, the follow-up to Far Cry 5, which was sort of a smaller offering, no map editor or features for multiplayer came with that aside from co-op, I believe. Now, something to note, when Far Cry 5 was unveiled, not only did they come out of the gate with information saying that in fact an editor and PvP component were coming to the game, PlayStation Network also listed that Far Cry 5 would have a multiplayer component of up to, I think it was 10 or 12 players, if I remember right. So, Fast forward to Far Cry 6. No mention of multiplayer or map editor was made at the reveal of the game. Marketing content is already out. No mention of multiplayer, no mention of the editor. Lots of pre-order bonuses, lots of versions that were unveiled, coming with a flamethrower and a wiener dog with wheels for back legs, which I think is super cute. And then PlayStation Network also showed its page as up to 2 players for multiplayer, which suggests co-op. So if anything, if we go by that as truth, and there is no multiplayer or PvP component, rather I should say, in Far Cry 6, and if there is an editor, it's likely to follow the Far Cry 4 footsteps in that the editor came with only a co-op component eventually that was patched in, but no player versus player outing, so to speak. So if we were to go by this information, this would confirm that Far Cry 6 will not get a player versus player component even if the map editor is present. A little bit disappointing. But here's the thing. That immediately does not kill my hype for Far Cry 6. I generally appreciate Far Cry games. The map editor and the multiplayer features have always been the primary focus for me and a lot of the multiplayer community, but I acknowledge that multiplayer and the editor have never been the primary focus of Far Cry games. Let's just be honest. It's always been about the single-player campaign focus, the antagonists, the unique settings, and the unique aesthetic and marketing and art and things that came along with the Far Cry universe, so to speak. So here's 2 things that I would like Ubisoft to do for this, in my opinion. Firstly, I would like Ubisoft to just come straight out and be honest, right? Are you planning a map editor and a player versus player component? Let's just get it out of the way, rip the band-aid off, and just let us know. Because here's the thing, and the reason why I beg this, or I don't want to come across as entitled, but I want to say, if you were asking me to pre-order your games and you're giving me like 5 different versions with all of these extra benefits and things like that, which is neat, I kind of want to know what the final package is going to look like. Even though Far Cry has never had a primary focus being on the multiplayer component of the game, I still want to know that it's there or it isn't. This is to help inform me and others as consumers to make an informed decision about your product. Far Cry 6 looks super cool. We're not going to get that wrong. But where Ubisoft failed in its marketing and communication efforts regarding Far Cry 4 is that they waited all the way until the goal line to reveal this information, while sort of leading us along to try to keep us at play, so to speak. And I just didn't really appreciate that as a consumer and as a fan. And the second thing I would like for them to do, I think it is time that Ubisoft release the map editor and a player versus player component of Far Cry 5 standalone, whether it be free to play or not. I just think that it deserves that. And I understand and I agree with the criticism that Far Cry 5's, Far Cry's multiplayer and editor are just not the focus of Far Cry games, and they never have been. And we don't know that that is really Ubisoft's intent to do that, but it is inherently by that because of the focus of the uniqueness and the awesomeness of the campaigns that usually come with Far Cry, that it just sort of sucks all of the oxygen out of the room where the multiplayer and PvP component just can't exist as a greater effort. And, you know, I would feel dishonest if I didn't sort of speculate that, honestly, this is just, in a way, gosh, I don't want to say this because it sounds mean, but in a way, I don't want to say that it's tacked on, but it's definitely not a large focus. And the fact that Ubisoft dropped the Far Cry Arcade growth and development to sort of move on to new projects like New Dawn, just kind of proves that it was just sort of a back burner type project, and which makes me sad because we have a really great community, not a big one, but a good one nonetheless. A lot of good, unique, creative people that like to build PvP maps in Far Cry. I think that the Far Cry editor and standalone multiplayer should be a thing. I think it should be separated from Far Cry. And honestly, these days, I think it should be made free. And you see these multiplayer titles, and Ubisoft just put out a battle royale that's in testing, or sort of alpha or beta testing right now on PC, that is going to be free to play, right? And I think that's cool, and it's imaginary. I don't mind microtransactions in video games as long as the buy-in price is 0 or super low, and there's not creating a sort of pay-to-win structure, right? I'm fine with that. Where I don't like is when you charge me $60 for a game as a barrier to entry, and then charge me microtransactions, and that's such a Ubisoft and Activision and Electronic Arts thing to do. Allowing this to be a standalone project and to be free completely shuts down the barrier to entry and lets the map editor community thrive, which I think would be super best for this particular. You don't even have to call it Far Cry, to be honest, but the Far Cry map editor was the best in the entire franchise up until now. And you know what? Maybe Ubisoft is holding the cards close to their chest. Maybe there is a PvP component in an editor. Maybe it's advanced. I'm also maybe a little disappointed that it's a cross-gen title, so that if there is an editor in multiplayer, it may serve to sort of hinder the capability of those things again, leaving us with small player lobbies. And, you know, I think that's a bummer. I would have preferred Far Cry 6 be a next-gen title only if that was the case, but you know, I can understand why a large video game production company would want to cater to everyone who owns machines. I mean, there are millions of consoles out there right now that they could easily develop for, and it's a big risk to take a game and make it next gen only, especially during a pandemic and an economic crisis. That would be a rough decision for me as a CEO to make if it were me, and I could see that. So tell me what you think about Far Cry 6. What do you think about map editor and the possibility that there isn't one, or a player versus player component in Far Cry 6? Put it down below. Like and subscribe if you thought this was informational to your Far Cry 6 experience, and hang around for future content or covering more information should it make itself available. And thanks for stopping by the LZ. See you later.